Welcome to Within WordPress, your podcast for basically getting to know the WordPress community better. And its community is comprised of a lot of people, a lot of fine folks. And with us today is Ian. Welcome, Ian. And
Hey,
feel free to introduce yourself in any way you feel fitting.
right on. Well, thanks a lot for having me. My name's Ian. I am a web developer from Jacksonville, Florida. I've been working with WordPress for about 11 or so years now, and I spent the vast majority of that time working at agencies, everything from one out of like a really big enterprise company to like really small local shops that kind of do everything, or places that only specialize in development. And then like most recently at Tenna, which is, one of
Yeah.
the top WordPress consultancies around. I was very fortunate to be able to work there. I learned a lot of things, a lot of really great folks, and they do a lot of really great open source work, including
I
some
do.
plugins. They're great go tos for me. And they made a Winamp plugin. I mean,
Yeah,
how
yeah. I
cool is
saw that. I
that?
saw that.
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I got a chance to actually do a PR on that. It's a really simple thing, like fixing a jumpy thing on load, like where the widget would just kind of like disappear and jump around on the page a little bit in some situations. It was very small, but it was really
Yeah.
fun. Just I loved milk drop in the day, so that was a big
Yeah.
one for me.
Those are cool.
So,
Yeah, no,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say the only other thing that I'm doing these days is I work at a place where like WordPress isn't my main focus, but we do WordPress here. And then I'm also making my course for teaching WordPress theme development. That's learn WP. Yeah, that's been a fun passion project, long time in the making for me.
Yeah. So creating courses is how shall I put this? It's an art form to get it right. I'm working on my courses as well, and I can at least say that the first version I created, I didn't like as I was then testing it, and the second version was a little bit better. But the third version has got to be the Lucky Charm version. I don't know if that's something you find you recognize yourself in, but
Oh, absolutely. You were talking before we got started even about that whole being trying the perfectionism, right? Like
yeah,
I have to have it be just so. I have this grand vision in my head. And I have absolutely struggled with that. I mean, of course, I'm also making content about theme development, which in this current environment is changing a lot. Like the site
very
editor
much
just
so.
kind of
Yeah,
just got its name changed the other month now, right? There's so many things that are constantly different. So it's like I'm trying to not make too many upfront decisions and be
yeah,
flexible and agile. And I'm trying to make the resource that I wish I had, but I think the main thing, and I can't remember exactly who said it. I want to say it was like Adam Wathan or somebody else who's made a lot of courses that I had read something for. They said, you want to try to make a course for your students, not a course for you, because you're not the one
yeah.
who's taking the thing. And while your students might have some overlap of what your interests and needs were, it's really about, really meeting their needs really closely. And so I've
Yeah.
tried to, you know, gut check everything with that.
That is very sound advice, and it is accurate. But the perfectionism still kicks in. And I'll get there. So the creating the first podcast was difficult. Creating my first video was difficult, and now it's I'm okay with it. I'm not comfortable with it, but I'm okay with it, and I think that's how it grows, and I think it's also how you learn anything new, really. Um, you mentioned TenUp and some of their open source stuff they have out. I'm a big fan of the I forgot the name, but there's a plugin. I think they even have a separate site for it. It's about sort of connecting to other sites, sharing content and stuff.
Yes, I know exactly the one you're talking
What
about,
the name of that
and I'm
again?
trying to like see if I can find the name of. But yeah, it's like for doing content syndication, and we
Yeah,
used to
yeah, yeah,
use that a lot to do pushes to like staging environments. Say,
yeah, yeah.
so like sort of sync things up and down in those cases. I can't for the life of me remember what the thing's called. I feel silly because I've used it so many times. You think I'd
Yeah,
remember?
same here. And I actually recently mentioned it in my newsletter, so I'm kind of like, why didn't I remember the name? But TenUp has built some great stuff. I remember reading Jake. Uh, this was to 2012, and that was very much in the early beginnings of 10up. But that was for the first the inaugural WordPress Community Summit in Tybee, Georgia.
Oh.
Uh, that's where I met Jake, and then you learn how others do it. Um, what drew you to 10up? What is that? What is the thing you did? Uh, uh, that made you say, okay, this is where I want to be. Other than,
Well,
hey, I got a job.
I mean, yeah, everybody likes to be gainfully employed, and
Yeah, of course.
all that money is of course necessary to live and all that, right? But I think honestly, it was the manager at the job I had before 10up at a small shop here called Oyova. He had for a long time. This is before I even knew who 10up was. He's like, oh
Mhm.
yeah, these people, they do so many great things and they have like these PHP best practices, which I still refer to all the time for doing
Yeah.
like WP query optimizations or certain PHP things. There's a couple of hills I will die on that I absolutely do not agree with, but part of those decisions are actually like WordPress core style things, like the use
Yeah.
of a long form array instead of just brackets. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't feel like that's a real problem that anyone in the world
We'll
has,
we'll get
especially
rid of them someday, but yeah.
yeah, you know what I mean. So it's like I'd always known of them as these people that were respected experts in WordPress who really put an emphasis on, like you were saying before, doing things the right way, or at least as much as reasonably possible, and trying to do things like as close to native WordPress as possible. So instead of just doing things quickly, it's like they say on the site, finely crafted, right? The craftsmanship element of
Yep.
the work and being able to work with like household brands and names like that is always cool. Like when you're making websites, right? Like I get plenty of satisfaction from making a website from a butcher shop down the street. If it's well done and it's helping somebody, then I'm doing a good thing. But it's
Mhm.
kind of cool to be able to say like, oh, I was able to do work on, like a household brand that you might have heard of, which you may or may not be able to always talk about, because of work things. But like the California DMV was the site to work on for it, things like
Oh,
that
that
or
that
other stuff like that. So fun, and
yeah.
it seemed like a challenge, a place where I'd be able to learn a lot and really be able to grow as a developer while still being able to do WordPress things. So that was kind of the thing that led me there.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a lot of people working in the WordPress community as a whole have there's a few large companies, obviously, but I think the bulk of the people are comprised of small businesses. So you'll have maybe 5, 6 colleagues. That's it. A little bit larger, and you'll have a team of 20 or something like that. But to actually have uh, hundreds of colleagues is quite a different endeavor. And I can see that being appealing in terms of being able to learn from others. I remember having my own agency. What is it? 6 years back, and at the time I was done with agencies. I was like, okay. I need to. I want to quit. I want to get out. Um, and then I got the chance to work for Yoast, and at the time that was pretty much about 100 people. Just to be in an environment where there's a lot of people around you, where you can learn from, where you can have conversations about, and certain topics that normally just reside in your head, because who's there to talk to, right? I can see that being a very interesting extra dynamic in terms of what a workplace brings, other than the challenge and the type of project you can work on and stuff like that. Did you have something similar like that in mind when you just said that?
Yeah, like I think it's a great point to bring up because when you have that huge team that's full of specialists, it's not just a couple of generalists, maybe one or two specialists. So
Yeah.
say you'd have dedicated QA people. You'd have
Mm.
say a person who specializes in ad delivery or specializes in doing
Yeah.
headless WordPress. And
Yeah.
so there might be a degree of crossover, right, on some of these things where sometimes, you have like an engineer who's setting up a CloudFront distribution, as a one off because they have to or circumstance, whatever. But having the separation of concerns so that you have people who are doing certain things, and then you have people with such deep expertise that you can, like you're saying, like learn from these people and say, like, wow, I can talk to somebody who actually like contributes on complicated parts of WordPress core, or like, for me, a big one for that who I want to give a shout out to because he's a quality human being who I hope you can get on here sometime is Fabian Kagi, who works there. He is the
Yep.
director of editorial experience now, which is a fancy way of saying all things Gutenberg and block development.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But he is a straight up wizard and a very helpful guy. Like he actually helped me do my first Gutenberg contribution. So that's why I can say I've done a WordPress core contribution, and it was an accessibility fix that I
Yeah.
actually discovered in the process of doing my required onboarding training. So while I was
Okay.
doing this, I was like, oh, hey, look at that. That URL input doesn't have like a accessible label and so on. And so I was able to talk to him and actually get through the perceivable red tape times for contributing to these things. And man,
Yeah.
that felt so hard. I don't know that I ever would have done that if not for him and working there and really feeling like I could do that. And he even helped like make sure that I, phrase things the right way, or like, so that I would get it visible to the right people, without like some kind of nepotism thing. But it was just so helpful, man. It felt so cool. And everybody there, I want to say this because I think this is really important. I was super blessed, if you will, to have nothing but helpful coworkers, like everybody there who had a problem and they could help you solve it, people would want to. Very nice,
Yeah.
welcoming culture in that
That
sense
is that.
is
Yeah.
incredible.
That those types of environments is exactly what I was referring to. That is just a warm bath. Yeah, I enjoyed it much. I'm back on my own now, in a different direction. I don't do any type of work anymore. For instance, in my agency, I've picked my specialty, so that makes it okay for me now. But the period working in a larger team, learning from other people about things you had no idea about that you could learn, yeah, that's a wonderful thing.
This is a
So
quick
you,
aside, by the
yeah,
way. Sorry, I just had to mention this because I noticed that you're it's called Truer Than North, right?
correct.
That's amazing. My wife, she's a real estate transaction coordinator, and her company name is True North Transaction.
Yeah. So
Very similar.
I'm a little bit above that, so it's truer than north. Um,
I won't
it
tell her.
no, that's fine, that's fine. Well, and I'll defend the same point, to her, but, no, it's, I live in the northern part of the Netherlands. I am close to the Nordics, uh, yeah, so the name is actually from a song, and it's more of a navigational thing, guidance, uh helping out sort of fashion, and I like that, component, combined in the name, so that's funny, yeah,
Nice.
yeah. That's a good aside 'cause, I didn't see that one coming. I was gonna ask you, the courses on theme development, so at you already touched on it, so there's a lot of things changing. We have or I think we're officially supposed to call it site editor now, nobody does, but that is the official decree. A site editor theme is built quite differently, um, versus a normal theme, or even the hybrid version of those themes are already quite different with theme.json. What is your opinion on that? Because if you're making a course about it, you have to have an opinion about theme JSON.
Oh, of course. No way, gotta, no, can't afford to be neutral in a moving train,
Yeah,
as they say, right? In this case, I think that there is a lot of value currently in both of these. That is to say, there are a lot of really good solutions out there that aren't block driven that are
mhm,
still very
so hybrid.
valuable, right? Or these hybrid kind of solutions, right? I generally would recommend doing that over, say, like a non-block theme that just uses a page builder. I mean, there
Yeah,
are folks that do that, but that's not the type of thing that I would be teaching in a course because I almost feel like to an extent you need to know WordPress things in order to be able to build that stuff. But working with those
yeah,
tools is almost like a course of its own rather than just like how are we using WordPress.
yeah,
So
I
I
agree.
think like as far as it goes, something like theme JSON does have a lot of potential to reduce the amount of static assets that get delivered to pages and
Yeah,
streamline and basically make more consistent the visual and the front end pieces, which I do really like. I think that there are some ergonomic factors of it that are frustrating at times because, well, I mean, I think like unless you know all those keys really well, like even if you have the schema included, so it like hints for you in VS Code or whatever about
Yep.
like what each of those keys are, it's just something about the structure has always felt a little weird. Like the way block spacing works, you start by saying
Yep.
in the
Yep.
settings, you just turn it on or not. And then in a completely separate place altogether, you say, this is what the block gap values actually are, that kind of thing. So I
Yep.
think that there's an awkward stage going on here where certain things feel a little weird. I overall though, I think the concept of having a sort of a set of those definitions is fantastic. In for any other developers who may have used Tailwind before, say, it's the exact same concept behind Tailwind. You
Yep.
have this JSON based or well, it's JS, but it's JSON in the end. It could be anyway, like this configuration that has all these different styles, these Lego pieces, which you then use those things like the developer in me loves that because it makes everything cohesive. And those are values that can be consumed by blocks that you don't make yourself. So like
Yep.
margin and padding. You don't have to do nearly as much nonsense to get other things to use your theme's stuff. So that does feel valuable. I suppose my biggest gripe of the whole thing, though, if I have one as far as theme JSON goes, is this kind of like this whole attitude from their like from a product standpoint over there that like everything should just be intrinsically designed like where you don't need a media query or a container query to do anything. We're just going to use like calc to make
Yeah.
this size fluid based on the viewport. And I think that that's one of those things that does not work in all scenarios. Like there's plenty of times when like font size is a great example where that probably is good because then it's kind of relatively scaled.
Yep.
Sometimes that's what you want, sometimes not. Sure, but it just feels like the wrong answer to me. I don't think media queries are the right answer either, though, because that's the solution from 5 years ago. But as of last year now, container queries though, those could have a lot more potential for that sort of thing. So like if this block displays at 500 pixels or wider, then do something or stuff like that. I'm not really sure how you could even reasonably do that inside an environment like this. So I don't want to pretend like it's an easy problem to solve. I actually asked Matt Mullenweg about this at WordCamp US 2017, 6 years ago. And the
Yeah. Yeah.
problem is still kind of being felt out even now. And it's not like nobody's tried.
No, but I think a lot of people have tried very different directions, which makes it hard to pick one. Because you have to pick
Exactly.
one that's going to stay in WordPress for a very, very long time. That's tough.
Yeah.
That's
It's interesting you say that because I meant to sort of touch on this too. I think one of the biggest sort of friction points in the current Gutenberg paradigm versus before.
yeah.
And I want to say, I think Johnny actually mentioned this on the podcast before, if I'm
Johnny
not
Harris on the
mistaken.
very first one. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, yeah, right. Where he would, I think it was him or somebody has said this before. Where like core, the attitude for core is like we don't want to break anything. We want to let that sucker like we want to change as little as possible, maintain compatibility forever if we can, and all that. Gutenberg project has kind of the exact opposite attitude. It's a very divergent sort of way of thinking. So you have things that ship with like experiment. You have like stuff core blocks that ship with experimental APIs, but the block's not experimental, and all this kind of wacky sort of stuff that seems kind of counter to the way WordPress core works. And the lack of like filterability of certain parts is also kind of a
Yeah.
little weird. But I feel like these are all problems that could be solved in time. None of them are things that are insurmountable issues or things that people aren't, I think, at least thinking about, but they are problems. I think that that is the type of thing that makes completely going over to the Gutenberg dark side for some of the more old school people. That makes that feel a lot more challenging.
So there,
You know?
I think it's good to understand that there's already a difference between how Gutenberg as a plugin does it versus what we call the block editor, because that's already a much
Yep.
more mature version where the experiments are no longer actually part of the deployment. But I agree with you. Um, there's way more experimenting and trying out things inside Gutenberg. Um, and for those of us who grew up with WordPress being the stable and fully backwards compatible tool, um, we have to have a different mindset now. You can't expect backwards compatibility to go on forever and ever. Having said that, the choice that is still I want to be as much backwards compatible as possible still dictates that we come up with a system that has been chewed on for so long. I wanted to curse there, but I'll refrain myself. But that has been chewed on for so damn long that to the point of integrating it, there's already a newer and better version of it, right? So I think a great example is the theme JSON version 1 and version 2. Like, are we already so mature that we're versioning? Like, what happened there? I'm pretty sure we're gonna get a new version as well, in 6.3, 6.4, 6.5, whenever. And it's still not so I think my complaint is here my gripe here is that it's still very much approached from the developer's perspective. Um, Having a theme JSON file where you don't have a tool to configure it first, for instance, I find limiting. Um, there are attempts to have a UI around it so you can do certain things, but the whole idea of it being, um, yeah,
I
you
know
have to,
exactly what you're.
yeah, I
Sorry.
was gonna say you have to understand so many layers of the JSON and what's inside of it, how that's configured, how that relates to each other, how it doesn't relate to each other. The example you gave. Uh, and you will need to understand all of that first before you can start thinking of how do I implement my CSS, which you have to also make a decision on how you want your CSS. Um, for then to look at how the theme works and how the blocks inside the theme work and the pay, it is a lot to overcome to get really excited, in my opinion. Um, it's not to say I'm not excited. It's just I felt the hurdles I had to take. So I started building my first full site editing themes probably about 7, 8 months ago. And before that, I just looked at it. I go like, yeah, that's not the way. Until it was settled that that was the way. Okay, damn it, I'll have to reposition my position.
My decisions have been made for me. Yeah, I know what you mean. And I think it's almost strange there wasn't some type of attempt to have like first party way to generate those. One
Yeah,
thing I thought of though, as you were saying this, I don't know if you've ever looked at this or not. WP Turbo dev, they have a site where they have these generators for things, and one of them they have is actually a theme based on generator. That's kind of cool. And they also have other stuff for doing like custom post types and whatnot, but it's kind of new. This stuff hasn't been around a while and
no,
certainly is not well known or anything. Like I literally had to look it up because I forgot what the name of it was. I had seen it like the other month or something. It's like having tools like that to sort of remove the friction of adoption,
yeah.
especially
So
during these uncertain, like you said, these uncertain feeling times. I think that's crucial to making people feel comfortable, feel like
yeah,
this is something like that I can because this is kind of a risk, right? When you're working on client work, to go with a new approach you haven't
mm,
spent time on, or to take time away from your job or client work to learn a different approach in the first place. So you have to
yeah,
you're making a decision to lose out on these other things you can to do this. So it's like people have to have a certain level of confidence in that, or else they have to have a very high tolerance for risk, or else they're going to say, well, that's not worth learning to me
yeah,
right now. And I think that tools, something like a generator, things that help kind of bridge those gaps are essential for increasing adoption, that sort of thing. And like for me, one of the big ones that I have recently done to that end is I use 10up's toolkit for doing all of my asset bundling and things now
yeah,
because it basically does all the things that WordPress scripts does, except it's a little bit more flexible. You can use it for a lot more things and you can do block development inside the theme, which is my typical MO when I'm building, like, that's another thing that we can that's perhaps a bit of a divisive subject, but in my estimation, and this is kind of what our attitude was at 10 Up 2, like, if you're building blocks, custom blocks that only work with your theme, it doesn't really there's no real point to having a separate plugin for them and then having a separate build process all for that stuff instead of these 2 different things. And so again, everybody's got a different school of thought there, but I found that it was nice to be able to have my theme assets and block stuff all done at once with hot reloading. Everything
Mhm.
just kind of works out of the box. But like that's an example of there's a team of people that work on that. So when
Yeah.
Gutenberg has updates and problems, you got the folks at 10 Up and these other contributors that are working hard in advance even to make sure that those things work. That's one thing that takes away my risk. You know, I can update to the latest version, I can make tweaks, I'm back in business. And I don't have to deal with as many of those nuances and risks.
Yeah. Yeah. Would you say we've reached the phase where everybody should start to feel comfortable with developing site editor themes, or are we still waiting for more stability,
To
more
me, I think that the answer to this somewhat depends a little, right? And like all things, right? Pets,
Yeah,
it should
yeah.
be like a trademark symbol appearing for that, right? Or something. But like
the very
I
least
would
t-shirts.
say exactly. I would we should do that seriously. Talk about that later. I think that I think that for most types of like small business less mission critical application, it's probably reasonable to say you could be doing this with a site editor theme and you might be able to get more performance as a result, especially on a less capable host because you have like the way that that content gets generated. It's able to be pretty optimized. It's able, we were, Johnny, I believe Harris was also talking about this too, like those improvements on the load times, things
Yeah.
like that, block themes and it's like, in those cases, yes, sure. However, like for something that does a lot of really complex stuff with data, like we're borderline web application territory, any sort of really
Yeah.
heavy hitting query stuff that isn't purely presentational, like, do this query loop to display these posts with some meta, or maybe it's a tax query to go with it. Like, not that kind of thing necessarily. I'm talking about much more involved stuff that I'm not sure that it would make sense to completely go all in on site editing in those cases, just because if you have to use all your
Yeah.
templates as HTML, there's no interop between
Yeah.
that really that I've been able to get working in a standard way in these site editor themes where it can. It's supposed to be able to fall back there, but it doesn't ever seem to work that way in practice, especially with these recent updates. And it's like, is there really a whole lot of value in doing that at all anyway? Like, if you're going to use PHP templates at all, you might as well just do it in a hybrid theme setup, which is designed to do that, where you
Yeah.
can then still do block things. You can still use blocks in PHP, even. So it's not even like, you can get some of the way there and have a very similar experience. But I wouldn't say that it's by default the right fit for everybody just yet. Like, things have been changing so rapidly and they're a lot more mature now, right? With the
Yeah.
way that you can do styles and all these other different options. Some stuff is a little questionable, right? Like that whole like editing, going from page content to template content thing that's recently
Yeah.
been discussed. I'm
Uh,
not sure I quite like because that feels confusing. But I wouldn't. I
that
would say
that feels
you have
like
to think
Drupal to me.
carefully. Sorry.
That feels like Drupal to me. That's the thing that put me off when I first, not first, but uh, client had a Drupal site, wanted me to help him with that as well, and I was like, okay, fine. And then the non-separation of um, content and the presentation layer, I found super confusing. I want to know where I'm at all times, and I want to be that have to be. I want that to be super clear. And I didn't like it the way Drupal did it. And I think it was Brian Gardner who shared that recently on Twitter. That the new version of Gutenberg will have.
Yeah, that's right.
Um, so I was like, "Hmm, I don't know. Um, I think I share your concern here. I don't particularly enjoy that becoming closer to each other. Um, I think it makes sense in the terms of having full control over. But I'm at this point, I'm not sure everybody should have full control.
That's an important point too. And they've in the block editor, they've added some of those features where you can like do like block locking and things. So it's like you can
Yep.
only edit certain parts and things like that. But I think that it's almost I think that anytime you're building anything for the web, it's dangerous to assume any sort of one size fits all attitude at all of any kind, of any subject. And a big one there is this sort of like everybody needs the ability to edit the entire site. I think that maybe the attitude, if I had to guess, that the attitude from the WordPress team is more like, well, maybe everybody doesn't, but now you're doing everything the same way. So you're not like developing these content blocks and the theme blocks separately, and everything's using the same stuff. And I don't know. I think there's a degree of sense to that, like having the same set of Legos, if you will, to build in these different contexts. Like you were saying, having the clean separation between this is my content and this is the thing that
Yeah.
renders the content. I think
Yep.
that's important, and yeah, that's something I sort of struggle with. Like it's almost kind of weird in a way to me that it makes sense architecturally, I guess, but like those new site editor templates, those are all post types too,
Yep.
which is weird because it's like technically they're a content type, but they're actually like not technical content really. But are
Yep.
they? See, and this is where it starts. This is where the lines of this all start to get a little weird. And so I could understand the reticence for anybody, in that scenario. I think the answer there though is like I think trying, like getting your feet wet with it and seeing what it's about and like learn and starting to learn that stuff now is good. Should you say every client needs to be using a site editor theme? No, I think that needs to be a considered decision.
Yep.
At 10 Up when I was working there, they actually had a policy of that. Like it wasn't deemed stable enough for enterprise use, so they're just not going to use it at all as a result
Yep.
because they want to use stuff that's stable for enterprise all the way down. So
Yep. And that
consistently,
makes sense. That makes sense.
I get that too. That may have changed, but I'm pretty sure it's still.
I have so I've there's a few sites for clients that I've turned into full site editing versions, just so I could have a way to learn and play. And that works better for me if it's a real site, right? So just fiddling around
Absolutely.
is just fiddling around. But if I have an example, and I didn't charge them for it, right? So they already had the theme up and ready. I just switched it around for a full site editing theme just to see what the experience was like and all that. So and with that knowledge, I'm looking at one of my larger clients that has a super complex site on Genesis. And what I like about Genesis is that it's the theme framework I've worked for over a decade. What I like about it, it's very granular, right? So I can be very specific where I hook into what and what do I delete and whatnot on whatever view, and I'm sort of eyeballing that theme and then looking at for instance, I really like the 2 themes that, recently were released, which is, Frost by, Brian Gardner slash WP Engine and Ollie, by Mike McAllister. So both
Yes.
themes are good examples of how a full theme, in the full site editing, world should look like. And if you then sort of go like, okay, so I solved this component here, I solved that. Okay, so wait, I can't do that yet. So how would I solve that? All right. I would then need to create a separate block for that where I have the flexibility that I have now as a function. So it's sort of retraining your head like a block is something presentational, but it's not, right? It can be completely hidden, but the block is there. So ads, for instance, ads are generated based on the tags in that theme. So the tags feed a little bit of JavaScript, which then interacts with a little bit of PHP, which does or does not display an ad, and depending on a few other scenarios. So there's a whole trigger of things, and doing that in PHP is pretty straightforward. Now I have to think about, oh no, it's a block. Okay, so I start out with creating a block. So what do I separate where? Does it make sense to have the JavaScript in the block, or do I still want it? All of these little things that I never had to think about because it was very clear how to do that. Um, you can have CSS per blocks. So wait, oh no, I don't have to include that in the style.css. I can do that in the block. but then I need to have the block only render that CSS when that block is in use on that page. So it's a whole different sequence of things to think about. And I'm using that theme just every now and then. I look go so I literally did this last week, like looking at it, like, so what do I do here? What do I do with that? And could I do this? And could just go through the things that make it easier for me to make the decision. Like when the client says I'm ready, because this one I'm not going to do for free. um, but when the client says we're ready for a new version of our theme, so they have been iterating over the last 18 years. So the next version is going to be an iteration as well. So will I then say yes? Let's do a block theme. I don't know yet, but I might in a year. Um, Maybe 6.5. I'm guessing 6.5 is the probably the mature version from what I can see happening now. But
Seems like a reasonable estimate.
yeah, we'll end up with 6.3 by the end of this year. So then 6.4 is early next year, and 6.5 is end of next year, is my guess. Well, it's about 18 months, I guess.
Yeah,
I,
I
I,
think
I hope I'm right.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I think as time goes on, we're gonna have more and more folks who sort of encounter these edges and start to come up
Yeah.
with these patterns, sort of like, hey, this is what we typically do in this situation. And that'll help start to smooth things out too, especially, for getting back into things. Like one thing, and then of course there's always just the potential that updates make things better. One that I thought of in that case when you were talking about this is like that whole problem of I have this block specific style sheet or JS that I want to deliver. And up until not too long ago, it was kind of was not exactly simple to do that really,
Yep.
right? Like there was some nuance to that. And now with like that block JSON thing where you can say like the script or the style handle or throw a file URL in there and it literally only
Yep.
loads it one time when it comes on the page. I love stuff. And I want to see more and more of those types of like day-to-day useful things coming into
Yep.
play. As a quick aside, by the way, I just wanted to shout out there again to Fabian and Ruba on Twitter. We for telling me about this or reminding me that it existed. That HTML tag processor thing that recently
Yeah.
got added is freaking awesome.
It
Like
is.
stuff like that is so cool, man. Like I need more of that sort of magic in my life, but for
And I think
the
we're getting
block
there.
things.
Yeah, I think we're getting it. That's a great example of something that's being added that nobody saw coming, and then, "Oh, okay, there's a tag, okay, whatever." And then somebody does a wonderful example of, what you can do with it, what it looks like, breaks it down. I think it was Aruba and Brian, together.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, yeah. I love their content. Fantastic.
yeah.
Brian is also the goat because he did something that I've meant to do for a long time, which was he implemented WP get attachment image in
Oh,
React
yeah,
for Gutenberg, which to me is one of my favorite WordPress methods, like functions ever, right? Like just like
why?
the how I think mainly just because it does so much stuff and it kind of works exactly the way I'd expect it to. And
Hmm,
it's just super freaking handy. Like I love that I can here's my image. All I need is an ID. I don't have to construct any markup. I get my source set. I get my sizes. I get my loading. I can pass
there you
any custom attribute I want. I can get any
go.
size that I want, either on demand or an intermediate registered size. And it automatically doesn't freaking echo anything. I don't have to
Yeah.
do any nonsense, man. It just works. I love it. I'm super.
That's a good point. That's a good point. It it solves a lot of headaches that you would normally have to program in,
Yeah.
and it's already been taken care of inside of core. And I think it's a great example of where I see the future of WordPress going. Right, taking the logic away from the things that really don't need logic. Because if this particular example, if you need to get a very specific attachment, um, think of all the stuff that you have to do first inside that function before you can actually say, and now echo that thing. Now give me the URL of it.
Gosh,
There's
yeah.
like, what is it, 4 or 5 lines of variables, and then from variable to the next function to the next function, and then at the end you can say, yes, and now give me this one and this specific thumbnail or large or whatever. It doesn't make a lot of sense to build like that. We've come to accept it. That's the way it is. But yeah, I think that's a great example of taking away the headaches that are just not supposed to be there. Um, so what are some of the challenges you see here? Because a lot of it is going in the right direction. Are there parts of this whole block venture that you go like, "Ooh, I don't know about that part. This is frightening," or "I don't like it. Doesn't gel with me."
I think probably I think if I could set one aspect of Gutenberg on fire, it would be the static blocks. Static blocks should not. I hate that. I hate that so much. To be clear, for anyone who doesn't know what that refers to, with Gutenberg blocks, if you have a dynamic block, there's this HTML comment and it gets kind of dynamically rendered as the page renders. So it's not
Yeah,
storing the final rendered result of that thing somewhere. Like if you have page caching, it's cached there. It's not a database that way. A static block, though, gets actually stored as the rendered final resulting markup. So, like, you say have a block that is a static block, and then you need to change a default class that gets added to that thing. Like, say there's some custom class that's being added needs to be taken away. You take that
yeah,
thing away, and now you have to do a block migration for every single one of those blocks. They're all going to invalidate because they don't match up to what was expected from the static generation. It's
yeah,
just, it's a whole thing. I tweeted about this the other day, and every single person was just like, "Yep."
yeah.
I don't think there's a single person out there going, "Oh yeah, static blocks, bro, for sure." Like even
A
at
little
10
bit of
up,
good.
we never built any of that. Hard
No,
policy on we never build them static for that exact reason. Just way
it doesn't
easier to
scale.
change it, and it doesn't scale as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's probably one of my biggest. I think that is not obvious to anyone until you've say read somebody's very well written opinion about the subject and can really
Mhm.
like because like for me like before I'd really worked at 10 up and started getting heavily into this stuff, I didn't even know that was a problem I'd have to worry about. Just
Yeah,
didn't even occur to me to think that that would be a potential issue. So that's a big one for me. I think also, and I don't know. I mean, I'm a big fan of rendering the actual editor, like the editor experience stuff, like in, or not that. Sorry, the like the final block output in PHP. Some people
yeah.
don't like doing that. Some people do. At 10 up, that's another thing that we were doing as a standard pattern. Just so that way your final it feels a little bit more like working with WordPress templates. You're still doing PHP things in a block. You still
Yeah.
have a PHP file, so knowing that that's an option, I think is huge. Because when I got started, I didn't even know you could do that. I didn't know that was a thing. I thought
Mhm.
everything has to be in JavaScript. This is nonsense. So many folks, I think, get the impression that everything that they were good at and thought was good in the world is going to die now as a part of using the block editor. And they, as a organization, need to go away from that. I actually told Rich Tabor the other day. I mentioned
Yeah.
this in a thread because this subject came up. I was like, I just think that a lot of people looked at this and how unpolished it was, and how like you were saying, like some of these things don't seem like they were super thought out, or like, how's this? This is totally going to change later, right? And then it's immediately turns them off from wanting to invest the time, and it makes that risk go straight
I
up.
think the ultimate example of this is the launch of Gutenberg, because that has turned off so many people on using the block editor. And I think it's still hurt. I honestly think we're still hurting over that one.
Like the turning off the classic editor, like deprecate officially, you mean? Right?
No, no, but the very first version,
Oh yeah.
WordPress 5.0, what was in there, what it did, what it looked like, all the nonsensical stuff in it, it just made it so much easier for people to hate. And you know as well as I do that developers love creating code that changes stuff, but they don't like change in of itself. So if and when they have an opportunity to complain and bitch and moan, they will. Um, that's just the nature of the beast.
Absolutely.
Um, so when you introduce something that is as radical as a new editor, you're going to it is inevitable to have a lot of resistance. So unless you make sure that that resistance is minimized by lowering the bar in terms of how to work with it, how to get it up, and the quality that it brings, and all that, but none of that was met. um, which is why we have Classic Press, why we have what is it? One of the most popular plugins in the WordPress plugin directory is the turn back on the classic editor, like which is, I'm sure if you've looked at the stats for um, Elementor, Beaver Builder during that period, during the release of 5.0, I'm sure they've seen an influx of users going like, okay, I'm not doing this. I'm moving over there. Uh,
And
Time
you know,
for
it's
me to ignore whatever this beast inside of WordPress is becoming. I think we're only now seeing, and what is it, 5 years almost, um, or six? I lost track. The
it's
last
something
couple of
like
years.
that.
Yeah,
Six years. I
yeah.
think I said that
So
wrong earlier.
that that is a long period, but I think we're only now finally seeing it becoming so mature that people are like, maybe I should check it out one more time."
Right. I think that's a huge point, and when you have stuff like create Guten block or like the 10 up toolkit or
Mm.
even 10 ups like Gutenberg resources or like the full site editing.com thing from Carolina, which is awesome. It's a
Oh, that's
fantastic
awesome.
resource for
Shout
everybody.
out. Absolutely love that.
Oh my God, so good. Knocked it out of the park there. Like those things didn't exist when this stuff came out, right?
Mm.
And so like I was thinking like what you were talking about how like you see that 1.0 experience. You have not a lot of documentation, completely different way of doing it. And now and again, going back to what you were saying before, now there's like 10,000 more things that I have to think about that were not problems that I had before. Like I came from a background of doing a lot of ACF driven development. So you have like
Yep.
flexible layouts and sections, right? You make your post group, attach it to a content type. It was kind of straightforward to do, like to just spin up something new like that. It was very easy to be very quick and productive. You want to get that onto the page. Maybe there's a bit of nuances if you're doing like flex sections, with like the rows with like children and stuff, but like
Yep.
that's kind of it. And to compare the experience of developing block like components in ACF, say, not actual blocks, mind you, like classic style, and then compare that to say Gutenberg development, there's just so many more things you have to know and understand. You have to have Webpack and be thinking maybe about like those WordPress like dependency injection things that they do for the app WordPress packages and all
Can
that
I tell
kind
you,
of
my favorite version of creating blocks is ACF.
that's what a
So
lot of people say.
it is
Yeah.
just so easy. You register the thing, you provide the files, and there is the PHP file, there's the template file, and it's working like any other template part you would have previously built in WordPress. It's very straightforward, and I don't have to think about that layer in between. And I've measured the performance impact is close to nil. So there's zero sense for me to fully deep dive into JavaScript, just because that is originally the way I should make it. No, I'm more than happy to use a framework for that solves that headache for me. Um, and this is not about me not wanting to learn JavaScript. It's more about um, the less energy I have to put into doing something that is quite mundane, registering a block, the happier I am. Simple as that.
Oh yeah, brother. And I mean, you're talking about these things even using believe that supports block JSON too and everything.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's core functionality. So, I haven't done nearly as much with this. And I admit though that I'm kind of sad that it's a pro only feature because as a result, that makes me say, like, if it was a free plugin anyone could just use, I might go, maybe that'd be cool to do like a little bonus section in my course about like here's another way you could do this using this
I still
plugin.
think it makes sense to
But
do that.
but I
I
might I
still
might
think
in
that.
the future, in other words, after I do these other things. I don't wanna
Yeah.
prioritize it if it's for a plugin that people would have to pay for, but it's so worth the money. And I paid for it forever ago, so I don't have to pay for it ever again.
Yeah.
Yeehaw, lifetime, right? But, like, I love the declarative nature of ACF. I feel
Yeah.
like in a way, the way that ACF does stuff, like, especially with meta field registration, is kind of how it should just work. Like, that might be a bit of a hot take to some people, but I think the idea of
No, but
having to do manual post meta registration by hand year of
Yep.
our Lord 2023 is
No, I'm not doing
shocking.
that. Yeah, I'm not doing
Ain't
that.
nobody got time for that. Right?
Exactly. Ain't nobody got time for that. So that is the same thing. So the only for those of you listening, thinking, hey, maybe I want to do that too. The only thing I want to add there that whether that is registering custom meta boxes or whatever, or registering a theme, blocks for the theme, or registering custom post types because you can do that now as well. Do export it to PHP code. Don't let ACF run that on the fly in the database because that is slower. Just be smart about it. But have it, use it to generate it and then put it in a PHP file fully, declare it there, and you're aces. That's the smart way to do. Um, but yeah, for me, it all boils down to what tool do you use to minimize me having to think about stuff. And if there's a tool that does it, I'm happy to use it. So a little sidestep here. When looking at Git, that is a perfect example. I love Git. I've been using Git oh, for over a decade, long before it was hip. Um, and I'm okay with having to do it on the command line. I know how to do it. But as soon as they're especially because I use Git flow inside of Git and source tree by Atlassian is an example of a tool that solves it perfectly in the UI. I know there's more. Excuse me. There's more tools that do it very well, but having the Git flow version of Git inside of a UI that just it's bare base. It's not beautiful. It just works really well. And I'll as soon as that came out, I'm like, I'm done with the command line for this. I'm using a source tree now. It just makes sense. It I don't have to think about how to rebase when I'm closing a feature branch. It's simple. If I need to do a hotfix, I just click on the little button that says "Create me a hotfix," and it does all the merging back to develop and math. I don't need to think about it, and that's exactly my goal. I don't want to think about stuff that is too mundane. That is, I shouldn't be forced to think about stuff like that. And that's what I like about the current state of the site editor themes, such as again Frost, um, Ollie, Ollie WP. What is the full name? Ollie or Ollie WP?
I think it's
The
all. I
pro-
think you got it right.
yeah. So they take the thinking away from me, and you know, um, it's as simple as that. If
I think a ton of value.
yeah,
Ton of value. I also I want you to know that this is a safe space where we both public. I also do not use Git on the CLI. I mean, sure, I've done software stuff for forever. I've used this stuff for. I use Tower for the
yeah,
exact same
yeah,
type of reasons you're talking about. What in what other universe can I literally do Command Z to undo the commit and re-add a file that I forgot to add to it? I can't do that in a terminal. So unless I just am concerned about looking smart to somebody or looking like a hacker real quick, let me just do this Git push. I can just do that with a keystroke. And it's like, why
yeah,
would you spend valuable time typing out a command that you could just do in a key press? Like I, it's the same thing like image optimization, right? Like having
yeah,
that done as the service when you upload, like with Imagify or something. So it like
yeah,
does it for me. I don't have to like throw it into a compressor and then resize it and then bring it up here. Like no one's got time for these things. Like this is all stuff that is like people should be paying me more so for my ability to implement a solution well, not just compensating doing like the same work over and over again by hand that I just don't need to do. It's like minifying your assets. We have robots to do
yeah,
that, pipeline to do that.
yeah. Please don't
These
make me
are
think very well. It it just yeah. I will say this. There's one huge exception where I will always say I prefer that over the default WordPress way, and that is WP-CLI. I'm absolutely in love with WP-CLI, especially when you combine it with Bash. Like most folks don't know this, and this is my first course that I will release. Is essentially not only just making you understand what WP-CLI is, other than uh, you know go to the site and learn, because for most people that doesn't work. Um, but to actually have scenarios where it makes sense to use WP-CLI, and then cherry on top, here's how you write scripts, and it's not difficult. It's very cool, using variables or whatever, and you can do awesome stuff with it. I have one of the things that I will release alongside the course is a bunch of scripts that I actually use. That is from installing a WordPress site that does everything, like everything, not just installing, but setting the right email address, setting the right users, the theme, downloading the plugins that I need, hardening this, the whole array of stuff that you need to do otherwise manually. And I just use one little command and I just enter and it does everything for me, things like that. Or vulnerability checks. It's not hard, but if you can make it complex, but it's very simple. You write it out in a script, and there's a lot of stuff you can do, hash calculations and stuff like that, and force downloads. If you are hacked, there's a version of that as well. There's a whole lot of stuff on. I normally go like, if I can do it smarter, yes, please. Give me a UI. WP-CLI is the only exception. I just love using that one. It's just um,
So,
it, there's a reason why I chose that one for my first course because it's the one that actually sparks joy.
oh, oh, totally. I know exactly what you mean. It's almost like having superpowers of a sort. It
Yeah,
feels like you can
I
scavenge
call it magic.
content.
I call it that's the real magic with WordPress is WP-CLI. For me, that is what it is.
Yeah, that's that. I'd say that that's one of those things that when I can use it to really get something done, that's where I just go, yeah, like that satisfying
Yeah,
feeling.
yeah, exactly,
One
exactly. I
thing
think you.
that's
I was going to
real
say,
quick.
I
One
think
thing
you
that's
caught the same bug that I did, by the sounds of it.
yeah, man. And WPCLI is actually kind of handy when you're doing block development too. Like if you're trying to track down which pages have a particular block,
Yep,
you can use
yep.
like the post search or things like post list with the search flag, which I didn't really know about until not too long ago, maybe a year and change or something. And it's killer. So you can do so much and you can get just the IDs and it's like you were saying, you combine that with the power of scripting can get pretty far. And you can even
Yep,
take somebody else's stuff that they've written and shared somewhere and maybe lightly tweak it this way and that. And
yeah,
you get some pretty sweet functionality that you might normally feel like, well, I have to pay a service or like get some crazy hosting thing or whatever to do this. And
but you
even
don't.
even on basic hosts, you can find WP like
Yep,
fantastic.
it's the best. It's the best. Uh,
Download
I
this podcast brought to you by WPCLI.
and
Download today.
you really should. You should find a host that has it installed. Um,
Absolutely. But for
in fact,
local
you should.
development, got
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. But I was going to say, in fact, you should find yourself a host that has it installed by default, but also allows you to add libraries easily. So most just make it available and lock you down to whatever version or whatever library of collection of WP-CLI scripts that you have. But if you have the right type of host, um, you can install whatever extra library and make it even more complete. So WP Profile, for instance, is a good one to use, which is not by default installed by most, but it's a wonderful extra library, same as WP Doctor. It's don't leave home without it. It's just what I'm saying.
absolutely, absolutely.
I,
And it's
I'd
nice when
like,
you work with like a managed host too, and
yeah,
help you with that
no,
stuff or
exactly. I'd like to be the now that I think about it, I'd like to let's see what happens. So 6.5. Let's see, we're at the stage then where we get as enthusiastic about block themes and everything that comes with it as we just did over WPCLI. How about that?
yeah, I think that's definitely the case, and I'm really thrilled with the promise of what that all brings. Right, like I like the idea of being able to say this is a visually editable theme that's
Mm,
made in the same way as a non-visually editable theme that's made in the same way as these parts that are the building blocks of your content. I do think there's a lot of potential value there. And once they get into that multiplayer collaboration stuff that they're going to be adding in this new phase and
yeah,
working
yeah,
on the UX and the docs, which is something that Rich Tabor, who's like the head of
yep.
product, I think, at Gutenberg. he was saying that that's like a big thing they're actively working on, helping deliver to the browser. So I think that I'm pretty bullish on the block editor as a feature in general. I feel like there's so many smart people and such a passionate community surrounding this that there's no way it won't eventually be good. So,
Yeah.
like, I
Oh,
love what you were
yeah.
saying about making those inroads, right? Where you have a client project and you're like, wouldn't be a huge risk to do this, and I could learn while I'm at it, and this is
Mhm.
going to be mutually beneficial for everybody. So why not? And then that's how you can start to really get your feet. Use things like your ACF blocks or 10 up toolkits of the world to help
Yep.
simplify and take away those abstractions. I think there's a lot of ways that people can get that sort of up. And as these things start to mature, hey, who knows? I mean, I think the future's bright for it all. Pretty excited to see where it all.
Same. Absolutely same. Um, and on that bombshell, I'd like to thank you so much for joining the podcast. It's been a lot of fun talking geek over block themes and NWP-CLI. We threw that one in as well. Uh, Thanks, Ian.
Thanks so much for having me, man. It's an honor to be here. It's been a fun conversation. I'm looking forward to looking up a few more of these things. Thanks